Welcome to the verse-by-verse study of the book of Proverbs. We begin the book's final chapter, chapter 31, which is divided into two parts. The first 9 verses serve as an introduction, where the author is outlining godly wisdom on leadership, which was imparted to him by his mother. And the final verses of this chapter are a beautiful list of the attributes of a godly woman, which is actually a personification of wisdom. And this final list provides a comprehensive description of the many attributes and the practical application of godly virtues of wisdom. And it serves as a fitting tribute, as an epilogue of this amazing book. So who is this author of chapter 31? Like in chapter 33, we don't know. We only have what we have here in the book, in the chapter. His name is Lemuel, which means to belong to God. And we're told that these words that came from his mom, means they are inspired. They are inspired words from God, from God's own voice. So God has inspired his mother to teach this future king how to be a person of character and how to avoid the many costly mistakes that many kings and leaders fall into, even to this day, that humbles them and causes them a painful fall. Let's begin. The sayings of King Lemuel, an inspired utterance, an inspired utterance. His mother taught him. So she says, "Listen, my son. Listen, son of my womb. Listen, my son. The answer to my prayers." In other words, be an answer to my prayers. So we have mom, the queen mother, is pleading with her son with these exclamation points. Her constant prayer for her son is that when he becomes king, he continues to listen, and to follow God's wisdom. And she's going to list 3 examples of the areas of concern that God's burden on her heart. Because these issues, as I said, are the causes of many kings and leaders to fall. They are prideful lust, excessive drinking, and favoritism. This wisdom begins in verse 3. Do not spend your strength on women, your vigor on those who ruin kings. The wisdom is, do not spend your life, your energy in chasing the opposite sex and foolish partying. That lifestyle is highly addictive, especially for someone in power. But the reality is, one day, she's pointing out, that you'll wake up just an empty, dirty, immoral old man that has wasted away his life in what Proverbs calls folly. We shall see later in this letter, this chapter, God's advice. His advice is so much better to pursue wisdom and a noble spouse. Notice she also adds, do not invest your time and energy in those that ruin kings, those. Too often a person in power attracts a posse, a group of people, and those people tend to want to manipulate, and they're basically foolish, false friends that are only there for themselves. And they tend to feed that leader's ego to flatter him. Rather than contributing to God's wisdom, they only add to the folly and the bad decisions and bad behavior. Next, she'll address addictive and abusive behavior, specifically drinking. It is not for kings, Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink, not for rulers to crave, to be addicted to beer. Why? Lest they drink and forget what has been decreed, both civil and moral law. And what happens when that happens? And deprive all the oppressed of their rights. Again, the point is that drinking unrestrained behavior impairs wisdom, decision-making. And in other words, waking up in the middle of the morning with a huge hangover or craving that drink during the day just to get you through the day does not lead to good judgment. And it does not instill confidence from your subordinates, from the folks you're supposed to supervise. A drunken king, even one that's drunk on power, too often forgets and is easily manipulated and ignores the decrees of right and wrong. As a result, typically that brings harm to those people with the least power, the least voice, which will be addressed in verses 8 and 9. This warning concludes with a general statement in verses 6 and 7. Let beer be for those who are perishing, wine for those who are in anguish. Let them drink and forget their poverty and remember their misery no more. The primary point here is that those that God has placed in leadership, they have no excuse. They have a moral obligation, responsibility to be sober, to make wise decisions. And what's being said here is the passage is not encouraging folks to drink, but rather making a general statement that the poor and the perishing may perhaps have an excuse to attempt to drink away their problems, but the leader does not. Mom shares the final leadership wisdom in verses 8 and 9. Her constant prayer is for her son to stand tall, to be sober, and to walk with God's wisdom. And now she'll give a specific example of what that looks like. She says, speak up. In other words, be the voice for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up, judge fairly, defend the right of the poor and needy. A people, any people, look to their king or to their leader, their boss, as a person of authority and the administrator of rules and justice. But morale and hope is severely negatively impacted when those rules are applied unfairly. Proverbs promises that a king or a boss that rules justly, in truth and with kindness, meaning that they rule without partiality, without favoritism, will be preserved. But the ruler that does not will not last. And this key point is that God does not show favoritism, and neither should we. God judges with kindness and with grace, and based solely on the facts. Unfortunately, man often judges and compromises based on what benefits him, or what is easy, or based on their personal bias, or in some cases based on what lobbyists, what folks tell him to manipulate and influence his judgment. Here in James 2, we have an example of favoritism and results. And we have this profound, difficult question, which says, what evil motivates us? What evil motivates our desire to treat the wealthy with more respect than the poor? Godly wisdom says that when placed in a position of authority, we are to judge like Lady Justice, who is purposefully blind to a person's wealth or status. So those in authority, whether it be a mom or dad or someone supervising a Boy Scout troop or a CEO, they have a moral obligation, a godly obligation to be proactive, to quote, as said here, speak up and defend the powerless when they are being abused by the powerful. That is not only the right thing to do, it also ensures a more peaceful and civil society group. Now the author begins with the final epilogue, with a set of beautiful verses that personifies wisdom in practical terms. The book of Proverbs, you recall, began with portraying wisdom as a woman, and it will close the same way. Let's take a look. These final verses are arranged in a poem format, such that each verse begins with a different letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And it's also formatted in a chiastic structure, which means we have the first 8 letters listed in alphabetical order, and then again are repeated in a reverse order. So we'll today only look at the first introductory verse, and next week we'll dig much deeper into these passages. A wife of noble character, who can find? A wife of noble character, who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. A wife, a spouse, a person of noble character is worth more, much more valuable than precious jewels. As we saw in previous chapters, wisdom should be something that should be sought after, pursued. Why? Because it's so precious. God's wisdom will yield us a noble character and blessings. Here, character means a well-deserved reputation of kindness, integrity, and a track record of exercising godly, blessed wisdom. Well, we'll close it there, and we'll finish up this beautiful chapter, which is a fitting summary, next week. Until then, may God bless you and bless your family with both His grace and His peace. Aloha.